You are listening to Awake in Relationship, a podcast about intimacy, community, and culture in a time of great change, with Silas Rose.
Hello, my name is Silas Rose, and you're tuned into Awake in Relationship. If you've been following the news recently, Facebook has been getting a lot of attention, and not for good reasons. The Wall Street Journal has done some really explosive reporting on leaked internal documents from the social media giant, many of which are reports from internal investigations that Facebook conducted to understand its potential negative impacts to individuals and society. Back in, I believe it was 2018, Facebook changed its core algorithm in an attempt to increase engagement on the platform. Basically, posts that got a lot of likes or comments got more exposure, which sounds great if we're talking about cat videos. But as we all know, what gets shared online is often emotionally driven content that at the most extreme end can be various forms of hate speech or misinformation. So the old newspaper adage, if it bleeds, it leads, very much applies in the modern media landscape. Rewarding negative content is a very central way that not just Facebook but all the social media giants hold our attention so they can sell more ads. In the information age, attention is a prized asset. Our attention or focus really is kind of a zero-sum game. We only have so much to give during the day. If we're spending a lot of time in the virtual world, caught up in various dramas, commenting on social media posts, we have less attention and potentially less empathy left over for the people we love, our family, our friends, or our neighbors. And what makes the Facebook files so disturbing for me, at least personally, is the platforms know about those costs, but are prioritizing profits over public safety and well-being. In this episode of Awake in Relationship, I speak with author and educator Dr. Charles Chaffinn about our most precious asset, our attention, detailed in his new book, Numb, How the Information Age Dulls Our Senses and How to Get Them Back. In this conversation, we discuss the perils of online life for our mental well-being and also for our ability to focus and be compassionate. We, of course, also explore solutions to reclaim our attention and put the social back in social media by using these persuasive technologies to enhance existing relationships and increase empathy. So if time spent online lately has been making you feel a little bit numb, I hope you'll stick around. Well, Charles Chaffinn, good afternoon and welcome to Awake in Relationship.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I really believe that technology is anything but benign, that it's always served as kind of a disruptor, in our economy, but more recently, I think, in our personal lives and certainly our relationships, which is really why I wanted to kind of bring you on the podcast. What was your inspiration for writing Numb?
Yeah, I don't see technology as necessarily being this evil force. I think, it's capitalism is part of everything that we do. And, we have to look at everything that we are consuming with a critical eye. So there are motivations of social media platforms to grab and hold attention of users, no different than what television networks and newspapers have been doing for decades. And so, I don't advocate that technology is this evil monster, but it is something that will manage us if we don't manage it. So kind of that opening disclaimer there, as far as writing Numb, I was really, my background is attention, and I'm interested in how our attention, which is the gateway to all that we experience, all that we do, and it's important, it's limited, it's the most valuable thing that we have. And I wanted to illustrate how our attention is being taken by these devices, and most importantly, some of the byproducts that have come from this information age, whether it's FOMO, whether it's confirmation bias, and some of the byproducts of that, as well as everything from compassion fatigue to issues related to pornography and whatnot, and offer ways for people to manage some of this technology without it managing them.
I think we're around the same age, Generation X.
Yeah, I'm between X and Y. It depends on what variable you look at. But yeah, roughly, I would imagine.
So by virtue of that, we both got to experience life pre-internet. Were you an early adopter of home computing and going online?
I was absolutely, and it's kind of, there's kind of, at least a couple of different waves to that. Going online was one thing relative to what we're talking about here, and then the elements of social media and smartphones, which is almost entirely different than the whatever that was 10 or 12 years where people were online, using large computers and whatnot. So yeah, I was an early adopter, but it was during that time, even in the early 2000s, it was I can't wait to go back to my device or go back home, or as a student to get to the computer lab because I want to see if I got some emails and whatever, which certainly changed when we got to around 2010.
So what was the indication that there was a problem? Like, how did you notice that in your own life?
Well, I mean, I think that, it's obvious seeing these byproducts that I've just mentioned. So, I wouldn't say that it necessarily is about these issues related solely to my life. I will say that the element of compassion fatigue was something that is beyond the scope of my research that I became very interested in, which really was the genesis of Numb. And that is, I was really interested in the constant exposure that we have to the suffering of others, the 15 minutes of fame that come from tragedies and news stories. And I was really interested in knowing how that constant exposure to those terrible images, those terrible videos, how that impacted our ability to be compassionate towards the people that we engage in our everyday lives. So if I'm watching people suffering on TV for 2 hours and somebody in my life later that day says they have a problem, am I going to say, oh my gosh, more suffering, I don't want to deal with it anymore? So I became very interested in that specific byproduct and then decided I really wanted Numb to be kind of a 360-degree view of all those byproducts.
So you make the point that, in the information age, attention is our most valuable asset. And I have a small confession to make. I find it very, very hard to read a book these days cover to cover and actually end up listening to your book in audio form. Somehow I find it easier to take in information that way. How is our ubiquitous use of our devices somewhat ruining our ability to focus and do deep work?
Well, I mean, ruining is a strong word. I would say inhibiting is probably a better word. The devices inhibit us because we have a limited capacity of attention. If I'm focusing my attention on something, that's at the expense of other things. We use the analogy that attention is like a spotlight. It's shining on a particular experience, a particular object, and that's also at the expense of many, many other things that it could be shining on. So if I have my phone next to me while I'm at dinner, even if it's off, even if it's turned over, I'm using some of these scarce, valuable cognitive resources on that phone. And that's coming at the expense of some element of being present or my attention being on my dinner companion or whatever it might be. So that element of attention being valuable and these devices designed, whether it's through push notifications, through what we call operant conditioning, which gets us into these dopamine loops, that's coming at the expense of something. So if we're taking 2 and 3 hours of our attention a day on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter or cable news or YouTube or pornography or whatever it is, that's coming at the expense of something. And what I try to get the reader to do, as well as listeners to the podcast, is not to tell people how to live their lives, but for them to understand the nature of attention at a very basic level and then say, is this a good ROI? Am I getting out of this what I thought? And a lot of people would say no. A lot of people would say no. Some people say yes, and that's great. Asking the question and reflecting upon that is important, with the ultimate goal of the reader or the listener to the podcast being purposeful about their engagement with technology.
I'm getting the sense that you're much more of a pragmatist than I am when it comes to use of our tech. I think I have kind of somewhat a more kind of darker view, especially of social media. The dark element for me is that they've somehow, they understand a very deep understanding of our human psychology and neurobiology, and are using the dopamine system, as you say, through these sort of fake rewards like likes or shares or friends to keep us engaged and to sell us ads.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, so is, television is, and newspapers and magazines have been delivering viewers or listeners to advertisers for decades. I'm not here, defending these platforms. I think they're as bad as tobacco companies or worse. However, there are good things to them. There are people who are geographically isolated. There can be ways that people can connect. But again, I mean, I like to use the analogy to TV because TV's been around for 50 or 60 years or whatever it might be, maybe 70 years. There, saying that TV, I'm sure there were people that said TV was evil back then. I mean, there were people in the 1500s that said, even when the printing press came out, that said, these books, we can't get these books, and who's going to read them? We got to know who's going to read these books. We can't just give out books. I mean, and now we look at that and say, well, that's insane. So there's always going to be some element of disruption or some element of concern about information and whatnot. With that said, these things are a problem, these platforms, social media, and all the other things that we've already highlighted here, they're a problem when they're a destination. They're a good thing if they're a tool to more productivity, deeper relationships with other people. Those types of things, those are good things. The problem is, for so many people, because of the things that you've mentioned, because of the variable reward strategies that I write about, and all the other tricks that they use, that people have become stuck in them, and they're investing more and more time in them, as opposed to using Facebook to connect with just their family who's geographically far away, or dating apps where they're designed to meet people and have deeper relationships, whether they're friends or whatnot. What we're seeing is people just get stuck in the tool and they don't get to their destination. And that's what I hope Numb helps them say, wait a minute, this isn't the destination that I'm hoping to get to. Being on Tinder for 3 years is not what I was hoping for, or Instagram or whatever it might be.
What if you could talk a little bit more about the dopamine system, because that is really kind of central to the addictive quality of being online, and certainly around the disruption or erosion of our ability to focus.
Yeah, I mean, this idea that whether it's social media or cable news or whatever, new information gives us some element of a dopamine hit, right? That is a pleasure-seeking neuron. And we get into this loop when we post something, and then we suddenly want to go back and check it, see if we're getting likes, see if we're getting positive comments about our selfies or about our vacation or whatever it might be. And we're constantly now in this loop where we're posting and we're checking those posts, and now our attention has been hijacked on those things. So through that process of both operant conditioning and this idea of dopamine, people get into this continual loop. Where we can address that is, first of all, if it's about an experience that we want to share, we post after it. We post after the experience. We reflect upon one of the bigger things is these platforms has caused many people to become content creators. So now we see the world through the lens of content creation, and therefore we select experiences based upon whether we think our audience is going to like them or not. So visiting grandma and grandpa is something I might want to do, but my audience might not enjoy it. So instead I'm going to go, I don't know, whatever, do tricks at the pool. I don't know. So now not only are we going to deal with this dopamine loop, but we're also now dealing with the types of experiences that we select in our own lives because we're looking at ourselves through this lens as a content creator. What did those likes really do for you? What did that time at the pool, was that something you really enjoyed doing, or did you do it because you wanted more affirmation or this artificial affirmation from the platform?
You spoke earlier about compassion fatigue, and it sort of feels like in our world right now, we're really kind of running out of empathy. I often feel like I'm a fire hose of kind of negative information coming at me. How does that affect our personal relationships? Well,
I mean, I think, again, it goes back to what I talked about earlier in a sense that if we're seeing suffering all the time, that does have an impact on our compassion towards people around us. We have a fixed amount of compassion. So what do we do about that? Well, compassion is an active and not a passive element. So if I'm feeling compassionate towards someone, hitting like because somebody posts something terrible that's happened to them is not necessarily demonstrating compassion. Helping that person, sending them money, asking them, meeting with them and talking, calling them up or whatever it might be, that's compassion. So when we're feeling overwhelmed because we've watched an hour of sensationalist cable news, there's a couple of things we could do. The first is maybe we shouldn't be watching an entire hour of cable news. That might be one. How much information do we need? The second piece of it, and probably maybe the more profound element, is since it's an active element, pick one thing out of the 8 terrible things that you are repeatedly hearing about, and pick one and do something about it. Not 8. You're not going to do 8. You're not going to be able to solve all the problems or even be involved in solving all of the world's problems. But you can pick one. Story number 3 was about puppies that were abused, and you saw the pictures of it in the local news story or whatever it might be. Maybe you volunteer at the shelter, at the animal shelter once a week. But pick one thing and do something about it, and then get away from it. And don't have yourself. The problem is there's this feeling of helplessness that people have because they're listening to this stuff for 2 and 3 hours a day and not doing anything about it. Well, that's helplessness. So if we can manage our consumption and then pick one thing that's most important to us, then we can really be more compassionate actively rather than passively and we can manage the amount of compassion we have towards other people.
So our conversation's naturally kind of turning towards solutions. What is one thing that the audience can do right now to kind of reclaim their connection in this sort of immersive environment?
Well, I mean, I think first and foremost, at a 30,000 foot level, is each of us has to analyze our relationship with our technology. So nowhere in this book do I talk about, well, you should be on social media for this amount of time per day, or you should be off of it all the time. That doesn't work, and it's not pragmatic. Each of us has to ask ourselves, is this working for us? Is the time that I'm spending on these platforms, the time that I'm spending as a content creator, the amount of FOMO that I'm getting because I'm seeing what other people are posting and me feeling like my life isn't good enough, is that working for me? And in a lot of cases, people have to decide what the ROI is there. I think when it comes to information, managing, as I already talked about, managing the amount of information that we receive, the sources of information that we get is really, really critical. And again, I can't emphasize this enough. We have to be thinking about whether it's our productivity or our relationships or our general happiness. We've got to be asking ourselves, are these platforms, is this technology leading us to the destinations that we want to get to? And if we're finding that we've been on a dating app for years and years at a time, and we have some element of choice overload related to that, or if we find that we're on YouTube for hours at a time and we're consuming conspiracy theories or constantly and whatnot, we've got to reevaluate this and say to ourselves, is this working? The end result for each individual when it comes to this question is going to be different for everyone. But I hope, again, that folks see these things as tools towards authenticity as opposed to just destinations.
In many ways, kids are most vulnerable to the influence or negative influence of persuasive technology. What do you suggest for parents?
Well, I mean, certainly there's a limit that parents can put on screen time. I'm not an expert or an authority when it comes to what that is. The focus of my work, what I would say is, particularly as we're relating to things like FOMO or body dysmorphia, those different types of things that I write about in the book, talking about some of the things that are on social media, no different than a parent should be talking about things that they're seeing on television and managing that, should happen. So, kids need to understand what FOMO is. They need to understand that not everything they're seeing on social media, even posted by their friends, is true. That people are putting their best foot forward, and they're not, and kids can't be comparing themselves to fantasy that's being posted. So from my perspective, I'm not a child psychologist. It's not my area. It's not even really a focus of none. But what I would say is parents need to be involved. There needs to be limits of screen time. They need to ask the same question of their kids as they're asking themselves, and that is, are these technology platforms leading their kids to more learning, more productivity, deeper relationships, or are they mired in them for hours at a time? And then finally, there needs to be open discussion about what some of that content is, whether it's social media or online, so that the children have a better understanding of what they're seeing and what's real and what's not, as they develop this, this impression of themselves, with self-esteem being more of an issue and whatnot.
I want to conclude our conversation with zooming out, and you've already done a bit of that. I think it's pretty clear that in the future, artificial intelligence is going to play a much bigger role in our life. And I'm open to the possibility of that being a good thing. And again, my default is to be a little bit more cynical. I think that's my own Gen X nature. I automatically think about the Terminator. What do you think are the possibilities for AI in terms of solutions, but also things to be cautious about.
Well, I'll take the positive side of AI. And I'll relate it to the issues centered around Section 230 of the Communications Act and whether social media companies are publishers or platforms. And that's a debate that there are going to be changes to Section 230. The right doesn't like it because they think it hampers free speech. The left doesn't like it because they think there's a lot of misinformation out there. You can argue that they both have a point. But regardless, everybody's united that what we have now is not working. At the same time, this is free. It's, folks can access it. I would argue they're paying with their attention, but it's free from a financial perspective. So what do we do here? We can't hire human beings to evaluate everything that's being posted. If I'm on Facebook, and I don't do this, but if I'm on Facebook and I'm watching the Academy Awards and I want to post something about who just won an award, if it goes to another human being to evaluate, by the time that posting gives up, it might be 3 weeks later. The moment has passed. It doesn't matter anymore. So human beings having some role in oversight of this content is not feasible. AI can help with that. AI can be very helpful when it comes to addressing elements of misinformation and maybe even dealing with the issues that the right has when it comes to censorship, that they see of censorship. So I think there are challenges with AI. There are challenges when it comes to algorithms. And I talk about that in the book. There are a lot of benefits there. So I think, though, that I'm cautiously optimistic that AI can help address some of the shortcomings of these platforms, particularly as it relates to misinformation.
Well, that's a great place to land. Charles Chaffinn, thank you so much for this conversation. How can people get the book and find out more about what
I appreciate
you do?
that. So NUM is available, How the Information Age Dulls Our Senses, How we can get them back. It's available on anywhere you would get a book. You could also get it as an ebook or Kindle, and it's available as an audiobook. The NUM podcast is available wherever you get podcasts, and you can find me on there's a website, charleschaffinn.com, or I'm at Dr Charles Chaffinn at Instagram and at Twitter and whatnot. You could find me in all those different spots.
That's awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.
I want to thank Charles again for this great conversation. It's certainly given me pause to think about my own online habits and where I'm spending my time and focus. If you want to learn more about his work, head over to charleschaffinn.com or check out the NUM podcast. I'll post some helpful links and some transcripts of this episode at awakenrelationship.com. While you're there, don't forget to sign up for the newsletter. If you have any feedback around this episode, you can send me a message either on Instagram or Twitter. I also have a link in the show notes to a new Google feedback form so you can share your thoughts there. Thank you so much for tuning in. Till next time, stay connected.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Awake in Relationship. If you liked what you heard, please click subscribe to get the latest show delivered fresh to your device, or sign up for our newsletter at awakeinrelationship.com. Sharing is caring.